things we're seeing in the TV industry is various types of consolidation. We're seeing M&A, we're seeing alliances spring up.
Yeah.
So how is that changing the landscape, and is TV advertising becoming even more attractive to buyers now that you've got these simplified points of access?
That's a good question, and there's quite a few different things in there to unpack. I think like the things that we've seen in the past couple of weeks, like AT&T and the purchase of Time Warner, the bids for Fox, Disney, it's an incredible time in that industry, and I kind of feel like it's those big companies realizing that potentially their infrastructure and their strategy for content production is potentially a little bit outdated, and they need to start thinking about how do they get their hands on as much content as possible to drive a user base that needs to be subscribers, digitally driven, and not so reliant on linear TV or the kind of old infrastructure that they used to deliver advertising on. So it's a really interesting time to see these companies do it. We follow companies like Netflix all the time and hold them up as the crown jewel, really, of that approach of building a content-first strategy and then basically, crippling yourself with debt to a degree. But as long as you keep getting the subscribers and they're willing to pay you, then they can continue to grow and they can continue to invest against that. What we're seeing at the moment, I think, is the companies like AT&T, and Disney is probably one I think has a better chance to do it, but AT&T specifically, they're coming from a background where they're largely ad-driven in terms of how they pay for some of their content and how they pay for some of their technology to run their business. They're not, and the subscriber point of view on AT&T is that they're largely overpriced. Like if you speak to any American in New York or anywhere in the United States, like most of them are significantly annoyed with, or really annoyed with, the cost of their subscription. Or any people who've moved from the UK to America, the cost of their subscription is massive in comparison to what we pay in the UK. And that leaves a bad taste in consumers' mouth. And I don't know how AT&T buying a massive ream of content is going to allow them to reduce their prices on the fees that they're charging to consumers at the moment, which means they might not see the growth that they're expecting. It really requires quite a drastic shift in the way that they focus on advertising and how they make money from their consumer base. But companies like Disney, who does have kind of an infrastructure for TV delivery, for advertising or linear revenue, but also are making quite big gains in the content space and quite successful gains in that with their acquisition of Marvel, Lucasfilm, and the money that they make from that, from films, they could easily reinvest that back into a piece of technology to look more like a Netflix or become a Disneyflix, which is, we're seeing the commentary of that in the marketplace right now. But I think the big ones, the ones that we all know and love, the AT&Ts, the Verizons, like they have a bigger challenge on their hands versus just buying content. Like they need to think about how they look more like Netflix, and sometimes I don't think they're going to be able to do that. But it's certainly interesting, and when these big companies start to make these plays, we've been talking about programmatic TV and data-driven advertising in the TV landscape for years now. I think it's kind of started. I don't think it's the wondrous massive thing that it is, and I still think linear TV advertising is still bigger than anything that we do in the data-driven space. But now with these type of maneuvers, it feels like they might actually start to give us that opportunity. Like if we want to buy advertising around that type of content and they're spending money on this type of content, they're going to have to really find a way to generate revenue to pay for it at the same time. So we're coming purely from the marketing and advertising industry, and that might be one way that they could do it. But it's certainly interesting to watch, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see where content licenses end up and who ends up becoming the powerhouses of this industry in the next couple of years.
Is TV possibly potentially facing an existential crisis in that people maybe in time won't want any ad-funded content at all, or will there always be a role for ads in the mix?
I'd like to think there would always be a role for ads in the mix. I think TV is facing this existential crisis. If you look at some of the data that's like freely and publicly available right now on companies that have launched subscription-based models, so companies like HBO and a few others in the US, their audience numbers actually haven't grown. Like they haven't increased the amount of people that are consuming their channels or consuming their online content, and it's actually just remained kind of flat. So it's actually been, if anything, kind of a stopping strategy for the cord cutters in the US. So the audiences have declined, and then they've launched their subscription model, and really it's just kind of plateaued. When you look at someone like Netflix, though, their user base is just going up and up and up. So there's something different in the strategies for the way that these businesses operate. Like something Netflix is doing differently to how someone who has launched a subscription MVPD platform, because they're not seeing the growth that they would. So that could cause a bit of a problem for them if they're going to think about, where do we go from here? If we're going to spend all this money to do this, but actually our audiences aren't going to grow, and people are still going to slice off the contract and go and do something else with another company, it's difficult. It's a difficult problem to solve. I'm not the person to answer the solution for it, but I can tell you that the data says that they're not growing probably the way that they want to when they launch a subscription model.